And we have a talk next, or a workshop rather, hands-on workshop on kombucha leather wallet making. So first of all, for those of you that haven't done that yet, I don't know if anybody's in that case. Yeah, so please change your name to our naming convention. So add your preferred pronouns and your affiliation. That would be greatly appreciated. Uh, and remember to unmute if you're not talking. Um, and we can ask questions in the chat, or we'll have some time for questions afterwards as well. Frazier, do you want to have questions throughout your presentation, or?
Yeah, they could go ahead and ask questions throughout. That would be okay. Yeah, that'd be fine.
And people feel free to put the questions in the chat instead if you prefer to do it that way, and then one of us can say them out loud. That works too.
Cool. All right.
So.
All right. So, hey everyone. My name is Frazier of Augmentation. Right. And today I'm going to show you all how to make a kombucha leather wallet. So, kombucha leather is actually pretty simple and easy to make. And let's see if I can get the camera to go. There we go. All right. So kombucha leather is pretty simple. You're probably already pretty familiar with it in terms of kombucha tea. The same process that's used to make kombucha tea is used to make kombucha leather. And the ingredients are very simple and easy to procure. It's just simple sugar and tea. Today I'm going to be using black tea just because it has a lot of tannins. So it's going to have more nutrients for the bacteria versus something like a green tea. Although you can use whatever you prefer. And if you're drinking this, use whatever tea to suit your taste. And then, of course, we need a mother culture, as I call it, or just a previous batch of already brewed kombucha, which we're going to use to inoculate our fresh culture with, so that way there's a bit of starting bacteria from which to grow from. And so when we say kombucha leather, what we really are talking about is this thing right here. And this here, it's also referred to as a SCOBY, but really what it is just a big sheet of bacterial cellulose. And when you're talking about using kombucha leather as a textile, this is the part that we're using here. And you'll see that when we go to actually harvest this, the process, like the minimum amount of processing that is involved in order to get this ready to use for our wallet making. All right. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this pot up with water here. I'm going to do about 4 cups. So that's about 1,000 milliliters of water. You don't need exactly this amount, of course. You can definitely adjust your ratios as you like. I'm just using this amount because this is the amount that fills the bottom of these little containers that I'm using to, about half an inch full. And that's really all you need. You don't need a whole lot of depth here because because a lot of the growth is happening at the surface. So the bacteria requires oxygen in order to produce, in order to go through its metabolic processes. So you're going to have the sheet growing at the very surface level of the liquid. So it's not going to happen very deep down. So that's why you're not really so concerned about the depth quite so much. All right. I'm going to go ahead and flick it on right here. And there we go. So I'm going to go ahead, while that's boiling, I'm going to go measure out my sugar, put it into this bowl right here. So I'm going to do about 2 cups of sugar. And that's actually going to be quite a good bit of sugar for the little amount of liquid that we have. I've seen the first recipe I ever used called for a gallon of water to 2 cups of sugar. And so since we're only using about 1,000 milliliters, this is going to be like a lot more sugar to a lot less water, but that's just fine. That'll get us a thicker SCOBY sheet, which is what we really want. A thicker sheet of bacterial cellulose, I mean. All right. And then in terms of grams, 2 cups converts to about 392 grams. And then, yeah, and that 4 cups of water is about 1,000 milliliters, like I said. So while that's going on, I'm also gonna just whip out my tea bags here. So I would say the minimum amount of tea bags you're gonna wanna use is 2, but in this case, I'm gonna use 4. And just like with the sugar, I'd say there's not like a minimum amount of tea that you can use. Just the more the merrier, the more nutrients are gonna be in there for the bacteria. I would recommend using tea bags just instead of like loose tea leaves, just so that way once the SCOBY actually grows, it's a little easier to like rinse off the SCOBY or the bacterial cellulose and just kind of clean it so you don't have these little particulates sticking around. But even if you choose to use loose leaf tea, that's just fine. It works just as well. And so speaking of the nutrients and like why we're using the nutrients we're using. So we're using sugar because it's essentially our carbon source. So what that means is you can interchange any other kind of carbohydrate for simple sucrose. So you could use mannitol, glucose, xylitol.
Frazier, we've got a question if we can use brown sugar.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as it has enough carbohydrates, you could use it. There's some companies, as a matter of fact, that actually use refuse from the agricultural process. So some companies grow their kombucha leather using like coconut milk, for example, or like corn stalks. There's enough sugar in there to promote the growth, although they probably do add a little extra bit of nutrients. So, and then in terms of the tea, so this tea gives you tannins, which is a good nutrient for the bacteria. And it's also a bit of a nitrogen source, but instead of tea, what you could use instead is a much better nitrogen source, something like corn steep liquor, which is basically just corn extract, or you could use something like a yeast extract or like a peptone broth, and instead of the tea. So there's a lot of different ingredients you can kind of play around with and experiment with, and different mixtures you can use in order to kind of optimize your growth. And no 2 kombucha cultures are the same. So the nutrients that are going to give you optimal growth for your culture are just really going to depend on the bacterial profile of that specific culture. So yeah, so you just kind of need to play around with it. My cultures tend to prefer a mix of like mannitol and corn steep liquor. But since I wanted to show you kind of the basics of how to do this and how to also have kombucha to drink, I just chose to use simple sugar and tea recipe, because drinking corn steep liquor and mannitol isn't quite that great as a tea now. So, all right. So while this is all going, all right, the heat's on, so that's going to boil. So I'm going to move over here now to my to show you some of the fully processed kombucha scobies and some of the dry stuff we got here. So first, let me actually just bring this over real quick and just show you once more the raw SCOBY, the raw bacterial cellulose sheet. So this is how it looks after about 2 weeks to a month of growth. It's about a 1/4 of an inch thick, I'd say.
Tell us how slimy it is, Fraser.
Yeah, it's really wet. Yeah, it kind of looks gross, but what you got to do is just when you take it out of here, you're going to notice that there's a lot of little like dark particulates in the broth. You go a little closer so they can kind of see. So you got these little things, which are just little yeast colonies that you're going to want to just kind of rinse off of the SCOBY. So I already pretty much rinsed off the SCOBY pretty well already. So what I do is just a really simple rinse off, just something like that, and you can just set it in the lid of the container or just on some kind of board or whatever, what have you, piece of wood. And then what I would do is I would set this somewhere outside or someplace like this windowsill would be good. Someplace where it gets a lot of sun so it'll dry out. Of course, you could just use like a dehydrator or an oven that works just as well. I just prefer the sun, so that way it's a nice long process and you can kind of observe how dry the SCOBY is getting, because you want to really monitor the drying process, because you want a SCOBY that's not too terribly wet and not too terribly dry.
Frazier, while you're doing the fermentation, any suggestions for avoiding fruit flies? We found that in those plastic containers, most of the fruit flies can still crawl into the lid.
Yeah, so honestly, with the fruit flies, sometimes I've just kind of let them into the container sometimes, and I found they don't inhibit the growth too terribly. What a lot of people do is you can put some kind of cheesecloth, like 2 or 3 layers of like cheesecloth over the lid, and then just kind of rub it down, so that way you have like some kind of breathability for your culture, while meanwhile the flies can't get in there. So yeah, I would recommend some kind of a cloth, just covering to use there. All right, and it looks like we're starting to boil here. So I'm just gonna take this off the heat real fast. All right, yeah, I'm gonna let that steep for a little bit here. And then, yeah, actually what I'm gonna do, just so it kind of speeds up the cooling process, is I'm just gonna transfer my liquid already into here, into the container. And then, yeah, just leave the lid off, just kind of let it steep. And so in terms of the temperature that you want your liquid to be at, a lot of people, well, okay, so the bacteria prefers a temperature between like 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 21 to 26 degrees Celsius. So that's what I usually like to let my culture cool to before I actually inoculate it with my bacterium. Although I found that you can just inoculate your liquid with the bacteria straight away up to like 100 degrees. But I just like to wait until the conditions are just right to inoculate. So then we're waiting for that to cool down. I also have some tea just already kind of prepared, a little bit of a batch to kind of cool it down further. So I'm going to add a little bit of extra tea. So this will just, of course, add more nutrients, but also just cool this the water down a bit. Just kind of speed things along here. Okay. All right, so while we're waiting for that to get back down to temperature, I'm going to show you the fully dried SCOBY sheets that I like to work with. So this is how it looks. And if you remember that 1/4 inch thick, just really slimy SCOBY sheet, you're going to see that a lot of that was really just water. I mean, if I come over here and do a comparison, you'll see just how, I don't know if you can.
Rosie, do you want to hold that up to the camera once you've done the comparison?
Yeah. So you can see how
nice.
See how kind of thick it is. So a lot of that is just water. When you dry it out, it's really going to thin down to about like a 1 millimeter thickness. And
Frazier, one trick we found out was that if you soak the fresh SCOBY in some baking soda solution for like 15 minutes to half an hour before you let it dry, you pretty much entirely remove any odor associated with it, which is convenient. Also neutralizes the pH if you're making something that's going to be in contact with skin. Yeah. And it winds up being a little bit lighter in color as well. I'm not sure why.
Huh.
pH, probably.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. It's mostly tannins, though. I don't know if you would expect much of a change with pH.
Yeah.
think so.
I know that in the past I have bleached these, which you know, certainly changes the color, and it also does kind of knock off the smell. Although I kind of wanted to get away from using like bleach on these,
Yeah.
you know, go more natural.
Yeah,
and
we tried a couple of different variations, including bleach, including hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is interesting because it sort of makes it foamy. And
yeah,
so what you're holding there is almost transparent, right? If you're using hydrogen peroxide, it becomes like almost like white, like thick paper or something, and a bit more spongy in texture.
it's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I've also mercerized these in solutions of sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid. And yeah, it does like bleach some of the color out when you do that, and it also makes it, you know, stronger because it swells up the cellulose fibers. Um, although it can make it a bit more brittle, it just depends on how long you treat it for in your concentration of your solution. But yeah, going about it like, I guess, the most natural way, this is what you're going to end up with here, this brown sheet. And what I find is that drying it for about 1 to 2 days is just about good enough to get it to the point where it's dry enough to where it's not like super gummy, but it's not so dry that it's going to be brittle and it's going to start to crack and break apart. So this is about where I like it to be for drying. So then what I do with this is I have my sheet, and I actually printed out these templates for making a wallet. So these are just very basic shapes. This is a little more complicated, a little more fancy there. I just downloaded this off of a website called The Art of Manliness. In the Google documents of the Google folder, I have the website linked actually. So you can go there and they have a whole wallet making tutorial, although they use leather. But yeah, that's where I got these from. And so, and then this is kind of the more arts and crafts part. I just put this on here just like this, and then I just use a pen to trace the outline, and then I just cut it out with a pair of scissors. So pretty simple, not too arduous. I don't know, you might actually find this kind of relaxing, I suppose. Yeah, it's a pretty simple activity, and I suppose it's kind of appropriate for Halloween because a lot of people tell me that these wallets look like flesh. They tell me that they're like flesh wallets, so I suppose it's kind of an appropriate thing to be making for this time of year.
Patrick, what do you mean by great fit for size? Is that just the size of the SCOBY that has been grown for the wallet?
Yeah, it's like his pattern is exactly the same size as the SCOBY he made. It's perfect.
Just like he thought of it in advance.
So for making larger sheets, we've made some pretty large ones. For one, we actually made a frame out of PVC pipe and then just strung it up like a hide. It looks really cool that way. It's very organic.
Yeah, we made a tub using PVC pipe and like I think just trash bags as like a tub. Just a really huge tub. We actually got some bathtubs now though, so we're gonna try that next if we ever grow like larger SCOBY sheets again.
Yeah, one of our members did a
Yeah, we
kitty
actually
pool,
have.
I think 4
Yeah, we
feet
actually have
4
like a
feet
huge.
across.
Yeah, like this is like a whole scroll of SCOBY that was harvested. It's like all folded up now, but that was like a pretty big sheet that we had. Yeah, this is kind of the more boring part, I guess you could say.
Okay, so Frazier, you've got a question. What's the website that you use the wallet template again?
It's called the artofmanliness.com.
Seriously?
It's like, just look that up and then look up like wallet tutorial or something.
It's like no women allowed in letter making.
Don't.
Yeah, there's tons of wallet templates out there. That was just one of the first ones I stumbled upon that seemed pretty like versatile. You know, it's just a really standard wallet template design.
Does anybody else have any favorite sites they use for this sort of design?
I did print out another design, but I don't remember where exactly I got it from. I don't think I have it with me anymore because I kind of stopped using it. But cutting this out.
Oh, so Anne, thank you. Just shared shared the link. If anybody wants to pop and look at the chat. And while Fraser's concentrating with sharp objects, does anybody else have any questions or anything they want to add from their kombucha experiences?
So just depending on like how dry or moist the SCOBY is, it can be kind of difficult to cut with. So just kind of be careful and kind of conservative with your cuts. It's definitely good to like rinse it off maybe a couple of times and just really let that kind of get that stickiness out of it. So of course bleaching also helps with that too. Because yeah, it just kind of makes your blades of your scissors kind of stick together a bit.
Yeah. Fraser, have you used any treatments to help keep the dry SCOBY supple after you use the baking soda or whatever?
Yeah, so if I have a really like dry SCOBY, I use vegetable glycerin.
Cool.
I don't really use it on this one here because it's supple enough, but yeah, if it's super dry, just vegetable glycerin, like just let it sit for a little while and let it absorb that glycerin like a couple hours, and then it'll be a lot more supple and workable. Or just put it in like glycerin the surface and then kind of leave it overnight would work. Or just water. You could just kind of submerge it to a bit of water and then take it out real quick. And
the audio is getting a little quiet, just so you know. So
okay.
Yeah. So just maybe speak up a little more to help us.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've also got a question from Melissa. Thank you, Melissa, on that she is sending home kits to students and wants to avoid sending glass bottles. And do you, Frazier, have any experience with the powdered live cultures that are available rather than passing around SCOBYs?
What were they? The powdered.
I can
you
add.
Can get. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So sorry, I have to put my dog away. So you can like Align started doing a powdered kombucha. That's I think more about like gut health, but it says there's live cultures in it. So I just started practicing with it this week, but I was curious if any of you have tried that. So you basically just pour it in water and it theoretically turns into kombucha.
But it's intended as a probiotic drink just like that, right? You don't actually let it ferment further, I think.
Correct. But there are cultures in it, which is my curiosity if I still mix it with the sweet tea.
And I know one of the big culture distributors here in the US actually sells a freeze-dried SCOBY specifically to be used as a starter. So we've tried that one twice and it totally did not work.
Yeah.
So that's my only experience. I haven't tried this powdered version.
Okay. That's helpful.
There are many online distributors that will send you a fresh SCOBY essentially in a heat-sealed plastic pouch. And those work really well.
Okay, thank you.
Has anybody tried dehydrating their own SCOBY and using that as a low tech freeze dry type thing, and then reconstituting?
We actually have a freeze dryer now, but we haven't actually tried it yet. So I'll let you know in a month or two.
That's cool. I'm just wondering if anybody's tried a low tech version of that with a home dehydrator or even an oven. Anybody?
I know supposedly for making sourdough, that's actually fairly easy. You just spread out some sourdough starter that I draw and you can restart from there very easily.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm just gonna kind of skip ahead just a little bit here and show you what all the pieces look like when they're all already kind of cut out. Because it just takes a bit to kind of cut these little bits out. So here's just how all the pieces look after they've been cut. So these are the pocket pieces.
Thank you.
Like so. And then this is just an inner pocket, or like just an inner piece, inner rectangle here, and then this is the outer big U piece. So what you're gonna do is just put this rectangular piece in, like so, and then fold those U-shaped ends up. So that makes 2 pockets in there. And then you're gonna take these bits, these pockets here, and then fold them up just like that. And that's kind of why with these, you have this little line here, so that's where you cut a little slit so you can actually bend it a bit more easily like that. And then you just insert it in there like so. And then same thing with the other side here. And then just kind of line it up, kind of line the sides up and line the ends of the pockets up with each other. And then basically what you do from there is you just start, I know that these have like guide holes on them, but that's more for string. And since I'm actually using pieces of the SCOBY to sew the wallet with, I'm just gonna cut like slits up the side and then across here. And then I'm gonna sew these 3 pockets together here without sewing into the back panel to make like a little coin pouch.
And how do you find the flexibility of the SCOBY to actually be able to sew?
What was that?
So just wondering, when you're actually using the dry SCOBY to stitch, does it work reasonably well, or do you have to be quite careful?
You have to be a bit careful. I've had instances where I've kind of ripped and torn the SCOBY a bit, especially if it's too dry or too wet. So that's why there's like that sweet spot of dryness to moistness that you want to be at when you start stitching it all together. And then, yeah, just be really careful. Go, I guess, like about half a centimeter. Cut your holes maybe like half a centimeter deep inside the pockets, and then start putting your lines into there or your threads into there. And then with the threads, these are what I think about, like a half centimeter.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, like a half centimeter thick threads. And I just use the offcuts from the previous SCOBY. So this is one of these pieces that I cut up already. So I just cut like slivers off and then just use that. So that way, you have way less waste and all that. So then, so I usually start with the innermost pockets first. I've already kind of you get a bit closer maybe so they can see. I've already put in 2 loops here, and then I have a thicker bit of like Scoby on this thread to like hold it in at the end there. So I just looped it in once, looped it in twice, and I'm going to do it 3 more times here.
And you're doing that without a needle. You're just cutting a slanted piece in the thread and just pulling it through.
Yeah, I'm just using a razor knife to cut this,
Yeah.
to cut these slits. What I really find is to be helpful is something like a pair of tweezers if it's difficult to pull through, or something like this, like a little pick to try and push it through and holes. So yeah, so this can get a bit tricky.
There's some custom leatherworking tools that would be perfect for this.
I was thinking of an awl myself.
Yeah, or the little wheel that punches the holes at regular intervals.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, the initial tutorial that I saw where they did this, they had those. Yeah, these are just more, just kind of basic implements that,
yeah,
you just use.
So we've got just under 15 minutes, Frazier, to go of the workshop.
All right. So yeah, so this is probably the most tedious part, of course. You just kind of working these through, threading it through right here. All right. And then just like that, and you just keep cutting the slits in and then just threading it on through, and then do the same thing with the other side here. Yeah. Yeah, I can just kind of show you how. I just kind of cut these slits. And I just kind of open them up. And yeah, I just kind of feed this through just little by little. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. And then, yeah, and then just do this for the other side. But for the other side, it's a bit more difficult because you have to go through all these different layers in order to thread it through and all that. All right. So you pretty much get the gist of that. So now let's just go back to our culture here and see kind of what the temperature is like. All right, so it's about still in the hundreds. Yeah, 53 degrees Celsius. All right, so what I'm probably gonna do is go ahead, kind of add my sugar here. And then just gonna add more of this tea that I have already made up, just kind of cool it down. Yeah. Right.
And if people want to do a workshop on this at their own community lab, I really recommend brewing a batch of tea in the evening and just let it cool overnight.
Yeah. Yeah, that would definitely work.
Because you don't want to be sitting around for half an hour for the tea to cool.
Yeah. Yeah, just make sure that sugar is pretty much dissolved in there. And then, all right. So there's that. Just check the temp. It's about 98. All right, so it's in the 90s, so it's not too terribly bad, honestly. I could inoculate like this, and I'll probably will just inoculate it at that temp. So now I'm just going to take a little sliver of this SCOBY off. And just go ahead and
How much SCOBY do you need?
So this just really kind of depends. Well,
Sure.
I mean, you can use, I think as much or as little as you want. I cut off a little corner last time, but I don't know. You could go with like a 1/4 inch or like a 1/2 inch strip if you really want a lot in there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're making kombucha for drinking, the recommendation is typically you start with 10% starter. And the main reason for that is because it will avoid any kind of contamination issues. Because you start out
Yeah, I was
with
going to
something
ask
that's
about
already sour enough.
contamination.
Yeah. So it all depends on how clean your kitchen is. You know, do you have molds around? Do you have a compost bin right next to where you're doing this work? All of that.
Yeah. All right. And then, yeah, I'm going to do, like about 1,000 mLs in here. Doesn't have to be too precise. I honestly just kind of eye it sometimes. And since there's so much liquid in this, you can actually probably split this between these two containers here. But having a little more liquid than usual is not a huge deal.
How thick a layer of liquid do you need?
You need it just like about 1/4 inch deep liquid layer is about good enough, I'd say, in my experience. Or that's about like what, 2.5 centimeters. So.
We've got about 7 minutes left.
7 minutes, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so that's a lot of liquid in there. So much liquid between these two. All right, this is probably enough for this container here too. This third container that the previous culture was sitting in. All right. Moving stuff in and out of my way here. Yeah. All right. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and add another piece into this one. But you don't even really need a piece of SCOBY. You just use just straight up culture liquid. Or you could use no culture liquid and a piece of SCOBY. Just really depends. I mean, having both just ensures that you have a good inoculation going on, of course. All right. So then, yeah, so I'm just going to cut another little piece of this off, I guess. All right.
Do you get better growth if you're using a reasonably fresh SCOBY? Because the one you're looking at looks like it's being more grown for kombucha rather than optimal growth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't grown these for like the tea. I've just grown them just for leather making purposes, and using a fresh one is good. of course. And yeah, I haven't. Yeah, if I was really optimizing the growth, I wouldn't really be using these ingredients. I'd be using like corn secret or mannitol, I think. That's what's about optimal for mine. All right, so then now those are all good and ready to go, and they've been inoculated. And so now we're just going to go back to our wallet, and yeah, so we got that one pocket kind of sewn up there already, and then all that's left to do is just sew up and across here. But since we're kind of short on time, I think I'm just going to go ahead and show you the finished product just so you can get a sense for what it's going to look like. So this one actually looks relatively gnarly. This is the wallet that I've personally been carrying around for like 6 months now. So you can see.
Can we get a close up on that, please? Possible?
You can see where the damage has been done to it. Up there's a bit of a rip, and down here, there's a bit of a rip. So, and yeah, you can see how the stitching goes from the bottom up and then just over like that, and then down the side there. So you have your money, dollar bill pocket, and then you have the little coin pocket in there. And yeah, I got a little bit of rippage there, and this looks a little bit different than a standard wallet because I did coat this in a gel of like chitosan, agar, and like acetic acid, just to try to give it a more waterproof coating and to also kind of fill in these gaps that I had after I had put the wallet together with the Scoby thread. Unfortunately, as you can see, the coating kind of chipped off a bit. So coating didn't work as well as I had hoped it would. But yeah, that was just kind of one quick experiment that I did with these. But yeah,
Did
some
you
of the
use,
coating's still on there.
Did you use glycerin on that one to keep it supple?
Yeah. This one was pretty dry. Oh yeah, I actually mercerized this one too. That's the other thing I did. Before I even put that chitosan coating on, I submerged this in a solution of sodium hydroxide, and then neutralize it with a solution of hydrochloric acid. I forget the percentage concentration of sodium hydroxide I used on this one, but yeah, so that's why it looks the topography is a bit different. You can see all these lines where it looks, I guess you could say, kind of stretched, and that's where the cellulose fibers swelled up, and the whole Scoby kind of just constricted there. So that's why it kind of looks like that, why it has these interesting lines in it.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, Frazier. Is there anything you want to wrap up with, maybe?
We don't actually have to end exactly at 45.
Okay.
The next thing is going to be the plenary session, right? So we do
In a
need
quarter
to
of an
leave a
hour,
little
or
bit
is
of
it long?
time for people to switch.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, if anybody has any more questions or anything, that's cool. But or if you just want to see me thread this through some more, but that's still a bit. So yeah, so this is pretty much it. Next thing I do is I take my cultures and put them up someplace. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a dark area. I found I could just leave them right here by the windows. Fine. And then after about 2 weeks to a month, I'd come back and harvest them. And then also, depending on the quality of your water source, you might want to use distilled water. I've had issues with using just regular tap water in the past. So if you want to play it safe, distilled water is just a good way to go. But otherwise, just tap water. If you have a decent.
Is that a pH thing, or dissolved minerals, or chlorine? What's the deal?
I think it's like dissolved minerals, like city water used before. So like some city water in Los Angeles, I think it's just too contaminated, like too many minerals, maybe just not purified, not good enough, I guess.
Yeah,
and,
I think it can be
pH
the chlorine as well, depending on where you are.
Definitely, yeah.
So if you just have one of those Brita filters where the filtered water sits around for a while, that's good enough to get rid of most of the issues.
Yeah. And in terms of the pH, a pH of about 3 is optimal. So when you make these and you check the pH, it's probably going to be about 3. And then if it's not, if you want to try to lower that pH, you can always use something like citric acid or acetic acid. That's just, or like vinegar. Just, anything to kind of like get that down lower if you need to.
Frazier, could you hold up the piece of dried SCOBY up to the light and maybe get the sheet that you had that you were starting out with, just to see the texture. It's such a lovely texture. I think if we can have like a close up of that.
It's quite translucent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I don't know if I mentioned this, but when I put the wet fresh scobies out to dry, I layer them on 2 or 3 layers thick, so I get a thicker SCOBY, because just one layer isn't that good if you're making something like a textile or an accessory like a wallet. So when you take the wet ones out to harvest, just stack them on top of each other. When they dry, they'll dry into one layer. Yeah, this is about, I think, 2 layers of SCOBY. I don't know if you can see that, but one's a lot thinner than the other. So yeah, you can
we often have problem with like big bubbles forming underneath, which then creates a thin area in the SCOBY. Any way to avoid that?
You can weigh it down with any number of objects. So the first time I ever made these, I actually just put like a plastic sheet over the SCOBY and then put like some book on top of it, just to really flatten it out.
No, during the fermentation, I mean.
Oh yeah.
We'll have like a big bubble forming in the middle, and that forms a thin spot in the SCOBY.
Yeah. I think part of it has to do with well, if you're using like a solid lid, I think some of it has to do with the water that drips down from the condensation, drips back down onto the SCOBY. I think that forms those thinner parts, I've noticed. So yeah, you might want to try to avoid the condensation, and so just use a fabric lid. Perhaps that's one way used to avoid that kind of problem. Yeah, and then just less particulates. Just really make sure you don't have any like crazy particulates. So that's why I prefer to not use like loose tea. And then just make sure all of your like solids are like dissolved and really well mixed in. Yeah.
Do you want to say a little bit about the other uses of a fresh SCOBY that you folks are playing with?
So you can, aside from like accessories and stuff, you can use these as like a packaging material. So I'm going to talk tomorrow a little bit about this company that's using SCOBYs for packaging, and they're using much thinner sheets. It's like a biodegradable packaging, or it's like bags. So that's a pretty good use. That's might be a better use for these if you want like a short-term compostable packaging solution. That might be pretty good for you. There's that. There's also just it's like a growth medium for other things. So yeah, you can use it in compost. You could use it to make just garden fabrics, like shirts, things of that nature. Yeah, and then we've experimented a little bit with using this as a growth medium for different like plant seeds. We haven't worked with it too much, but we're thinking it might be able to provide some nutrients for like a bit of a pH boost to some seeds. The seeds like to be in a really acidic pH. So it's just kind of one quick idea that we had for the use of these.
All right. Any final questions? Anybody? I know a couple of the organizers need to join the prep for the plenary session. So
thanks, Frazier. That was amazing.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, pretty easy, in its simplest form. There's not a whole heck of a lot to it. So yeah, that's just what I was trying to demonstrate here.
but it can lead to tons of interesting science projects as well. You can play with like different ways to keep it supple, different ways to waterproof it better. You can actually get kombucha scobies from lots of different sources, and they all behave kind of differently, and they will also taste differently. So you can do some interesting taste testing projects.
Yeah. Yeah, you can also just eat them. Yeah, I use them as food. They're like kind of like a diet food sometimes, just because they're low calorie, because it's just cellulose, so it's just as a filler. That's one other use for these.
All right, thank you very much, Frazier. It was a great workshop.
All right, thank you.